Welcome to this explainer. We are plunging straight into the absolute high-stakes reality of the Revolutionary War. You know, if you picture the American Revolution as this straight, inevitable march to victory, well, you'd be missing the most incredible parts of the story. Because after those first battles near Boston, this war was far, far from decided. What we're really looking at is a brutal series of hardships, devastating setbacks, and a few critical turning points that completely flipped the outcome of the war. And tasked with navigating this total storm, George Washington, a commander who had to somehow organize a struggling, newly formed army against literally one of the most powerful military forces on the planet. Which brings us right to the central question we're exploring today. How did a struggling, mostly untrained army actually survive its absolute darkest hours? Okay, let's dive into this. We are going to look at a true rise, fall, rise narrative. This isn't just a boring list of dates and battles. It is a cinematic story of an army constantly teetering on the brink of total collapse, only to pull off some of the most dramatic reversals in military history. So, here is our timeline. We're following a chronological roller coaster from 1775 to 1778. We kick things off with Washington taking command in July 1775, then we plummet into the devastating New York defeats in the summer of 76. Right when all hope seems lost, boom, the Trenton surprise in December 76, the massive victory at Saratoga in October 77, and finally, that grueling winter at Valley Forge. It's a constant pendulum swing of fortunes, so let's get into it. Let's start at the very beginning, July 1775. George Washington officially steps up to take command of the newly formed Continental Army in Boston. But honestly, using the term army might have been a bit of an overstatement at that exact moment. The crucial thing to understand here is that Washington didn't inherit some polished, well-oiled military machine. Not at all. He inherited a force made up largely of untrained militia volunteers. They had highly limited supplies, and as you can probably imagine with a passionately patched-together volunteer force, incredibly inconsistent discipline. Washington's early leadership really had to focus on wrangling this loosely structured group into a professional fighting force. And it wasn't an overnight fix. This was a painstakingly slow process that faced frustrating challenges through the whole war. But despite those massive organizational hurdles, Washington actually managed to secure an incredible, morale-boosting victory quite early on, in March of 1776. Against all odds, this ragtag group of volunteers pulled off exactly what the young cause needed to prove they could, actually stand up to the might of the British forces. So how did they do it? It came down to a brilliant, honestly kind of wild, tactical move. Continental forces used heavy artillery, specifically cannons they dragged all the way from Fort Ticonderoga to fortify high-ground positions overlooking Boston. This tactical advantage was so overwhelming that it literally forced the British troops to pack up and evacuate the city. It was a massive win. Spirits were absolutely soaring. But remember that roller coaster we talked about earlier? Yeah. The transition from the high morale and tactical optimism in Boston to the brutal reality of the New York campaign in the summer of 1776 was jarring, to say the least. Those early highs were about to crash into some profound lows. Because following the evacuation of Boston, the entire focus of the war shifted south to New York. The British weren't just going to give up and go home. They launched a massive, highly coordinated military campaign in the summer of 76, and they were determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. The results for Washington's army? Absolutely devastating. They suffered a series of major defeats, most notably the disaster at the Battle of Long Island. The Continental Army was completely overpowered and forced into this desperate, scrambling retreat all the way across New Jersey. This specific period honestly remains one of the most difficult, heartbreaking stretches of the entire war.
Which brings us to a terrifying question. Look at the situation as winter approached at the end of 1776. Morale is plummeting, and even worse, most of the soldiers' enlistments were set to expire on December 31st. The men could literally just pack up and go home legally. There were serious, legitimate concerns about whether the army could even continue existing. The whole cause seemed to be hanging by a thread.
And then, we arrive at a huge turning point. 25. That's not just a random number. It represents a very specific, desperate night. December 25th, 1776, Christmas night. With his army about to dissolve in a matter of days, Washington knew he had to do something drastic. He needed a gamble to change everything. In a ridiculously bold move on that night, Washington led his troops across the freezing, ice-choked waters of the Delaware River. Their target? A surprise attack on Hessian forces. These were highly trained German soldiers fighting for Britain, stationed in Trenton, New Jersey. This was a massive do-or-die risk. If it failed, the war was essentially over.
But the crazy thing is, it worked. The attack was a stunning, significant victory for the Continental Army. And Washington didn't just stop there. He followed it up shortly with another crucial win at the Battle of Princeton in early January 1777. The impact of these two victories, you really can't overstate it. They were real game changers that restored Army morale and brought confidence back to the cause right when the outcome was completely uncertain. They survived the winter.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit through the year to October 1777. We arrive at what is arguably one of the most pivotal moments of the entire war, the Battle of Saratoga in New York. If Trenton kept the army alive, Saratoga proved they could actually win the whole thing.
At Saratoga, Continental forces achieved a monumental victory. And this wasn't just a strategic retreat by the enemy, it resulted in the outright surrender of a massive British army. This was huge. This battlefield victory finally proved the Continental Army's legitimacy. They weren't just some ragtag militia anymore. They were a legitimate force capable of defeating a major British army in conventional, head-to-head combat.
And that new legitimacy on the world stage, it had an immediate, world-altering consequence. The victory at Saratoga was the absolute critical factor in convincing France to formally ally with the American colonies in 1778. This alliance completely shifted the board. It provided crucial military support, vital supplies, and some desperately needed naval assistance. It completely upended the balance of power and significantly strengthened the Continental War effort.
However, as great as that is, foreign support takes time to actually arrive. Meanwhile, the war was still happening on the ground in America. This brings us to the infamous winter of 1777 to 1778. Washington's army faced its next great test of resilience at a place called Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. It became a true crucible.
The reality of Valley Forge is one of really stark contrasts. On one hand, you have extreme physical hardship. The army endured horrifyingly difficult conditions, facing severe shortages of food, adequate clothing, and basic supplies in the freezing cold. But on the flip side, you have this steadfast resilience. It wasn't just a camp of suffering. It was a place of quiet, determined endurance, where Washington tirelessly worked to hold the army together through sheer force of will.
Now, what's really amazing is that they didn't just survive Valley Forge, they used that grueling winter to level up. European officers, most notably Baron von Steuben, came in to implement a strict process. He reorganized the struggling troops, set up uniform, strict military training, and drastically improved the army's overall discipline. They walked into Valley Forge as a struggling, battered force, and they walked out as a cohesive, disciplined military unit.
So, as we recap this incredible journey on our timeline, you can really see that full rise, fall, rise arc. The path to American victory was absolutely not a straight line. It started in July 1775 with an untrained militia, plummeted into those painful defeats in New York, rebounded with a desperate gamble at Trenton, hit a pivotal high point with the Saratoga victory, and then solidified during that freezing winter at Valley Forge. It was Washington's steady perseverance combined with that crucial foreign support that ultimately transformed an untrained militia into a truly disciplined force. Which leaves us right here. Washington now has a newly disciplined, trained army emerging from Valley Forge. He's got powerful allies in the French bringing in supplies and naval support. The pieces are finally in place. But the British are still a massive threat, and the war is far from over. So with these incredible new advantages, how would America finally secure its ultimate victory and win its independence? Well, that is exactly what we are going to explore in Part 3. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, and I absolutely can't wait to dive into the conclusion of this incredible story with you next.